Welcome to Conveyancing Matters with Lorraine and Stu. Join us for a chat about all things property.
Hello.
Hi there, how you doing?
I'm all right, thank you.
Good stuff. Well, today we've got a special guest. We were just discussing how to introduce Beth with a surname almost as bad as mine, not quite as bad as mine. Yeah, the fingers in many pies, shall we say. So Beth, do you want to introduce yourself?
Well, I'm Bethany Rudolf, but most of you know me as Beth Rudolf. And I actually started my working life as an estate agent. And then after a year, got pulled into conveyancers and became a high street conveyancer and qualified as a legal executive and licensed conveyancer. Then ended up working for volume conveyancing. I also program case management systems as well. This is all thanks to ZX81, and then became a consultant just before the financial crisis, and then went, oh damn, nobody wants me to go and help them in a conveyancing office, which was brilliant, because then I went and helped train domestic energy assessors, mortgage administrators. I have CMAP 3. I also worked in a search delivery, so helped create the search summaries for buyers and conveyancers for STL Group, worked with Pi doing searches as well, even helped double glazing salesmen. So
I don't think there's any part of the house buying process, Beth, that you haven't actually been involved with.
No, only surveying, but luckily my other half trained as a surveyor, so
My God.
I'm covered.
Perfect.
And so the Conveyancing Association asked me to join them and write their white paper on improving the home moving process, because we'd heard a snippet that Bays were going to bring out a call for evidence on the home moving process. As it turned out, it wasn't Bays, it ended up MHCLG, now DLUH.
Oh, don't get me onto the levelling up thing.
We've got to think how we can fit it all in. But anyway, I think they mean levelling it down to 11-metre heights from a cladding perspective. Anyway,
yeah.
So yes, we put together the white papers. We did loads of research on how they're doing it brilliantly elsewhere and why we have so many problems here. And out of the call for evidence came the report back from the ministry, and they said we need an industry group to help us deliver this. And so the home buying and selling group was born, thanks to Kate Faulkner, who is the chair, and I'm now deputy chair of that, also chair of one of their subgroups. So there's a variety of different subgroups: leasehold, upfront information, reservation agreements, education, snagging, property logbooks, digital ID, loads going on. And I'm the chair of the reservation agreements subgroup. And we had our first meeting in 18 months last week, because Kantar, who are the ministry's behavioural research researchers, were told again that they could now carry on and trial reservation agreements, though note, it has to be with upfront information, because whilst the consumers say, yeah, we want to be tied in, it will be great, who wants to be tied into 18 weeks of misery waiting to find out if you're going to exchange contracts? So what we need to do is ensure that everybody has the information upfront so that exchange of contracts can happen much quicker, and any buyer going to buy a property has got enough material facts to know if it's the right thing for them and their intended use and enjoyment, and also, of course, for the lender, because we don't want post-valuation queries.
So Beth, that's such an enormous list of well, firstly, achievements, quite frankly. You know, you are a one-woman property dynamo, it seems to me. But there are so many threads that you mentioned there, and I mean, it's certainly something that Stu and I talk about quite a lot, because and I feel like I can say anything because I'm sort of independent, really, but certainly from the outside looking in, what I feel and what I see quite a lot, Beth, is I think there are a lot of people in the so-called prop tech space who are all providing kind of potentially individual solutions to a large number of the things that you've mentioned. And I wonder, Beth, you know, from a strategic point of view, how do you think that a number of those key issues and those key wins that clearly the profession needs as a whole are going to be brought together? Because you've seemed to me to just have a lot of organizations doing fantastic stuff, but there's too much for individual conveyancing firms to take on board. If I'm a coalface conveyancer and I've got half a dozen different organisations that want to talk to me about half a dozen different things, I'm probably not going to talk to any of them. So how's the home buying and selling group facing that, what seems to me to be pretty big challenge?
You've absolutely nailed it. We discussed this earlier in the year and came up with the technology subgroup. So again, from my holistic knowledge of the home moving process, I knew that the estate agent software doesn't speak to the conveyancing software unless you pay £10,000 to have an integration built so that you can receive instructions from them. And that certainly doesn't speak to the mortgage broking software, doesn't speak to the lender software. So what we needed to do was bring all the software suppliers together to get them thinking about how they can share data that is used across the process, but also with the BASB, the Buying and Selling Property Information, which was produced by the Upfront Information Group, and the data set was published in March this year. And that is intended to produce one sort of source of truth, which is used by all the stakeholders in the home moving process. So it's not just for the conveyancers. I know we think it's all about us, and really it is, but the consumer, of course, needs to have their material facts. The valuer needs to have the information that they need so they don't make assumptions when they're valuing. So what we thought the tech subgroup could do was ensure that a data standard was used across the board, so that if I say flat 4, you know what that means, and you're not going to say ground floor flat. We can have that assurance that everybody's going to get the same information. And then they said, well, that's all well and good, Beth, but we need a standard API format because we need to be able to transfer the data between us. So they've cracked on and looking at that. And what they're looking to do now is to ensure that all of the stakeholder technologies can share information across the board for the home moving process. Now, they've just produced what they're calling open conveyancing, which is an idea to share the digital identity trust framework that is currently being piloted by the Department of Culture, Media and Sports. And Stuart Young at Etive is being the project manager for the home buying and selling My Identity version. And what they're doing is they're applying that trust framework, but to the property. So whereas you might have attributes that you want to prove for the digital identity, like your age or your sex or whatever, instead for property, you want to prove whether it's leasehold or freehold, whether it's got planning permission, buildings regulations. So what they're trying to do now is to put it along those lines so that it's ensuring that we have the provenance to that data. So if you receive the information in the BASB, you know whether it comes from the seller or the estate agent or from the land registry. And then you know how much you want to trust it and how much due diligence you're going to need to do around it. So yes, you're absolutely right, Lorraine. There's so much going on, and what we want to do is pull it all in so that it can be delivered to you through your technology, but also for the consumer, for it to be delivered directly to them. Because the big problem that I've experienced in the home moving industry is that all of the technology seems to be around the back office for the conveyancer, trying to make it more efficient, and less of it is about actually delivering to the consumer something that's going to tell them what's going on in their chain, or what's information they need, or what happens next. So that's the plan. Does that help?
Yeah, I think it does. I mean, Stu, what's your view?
Similar to sort of, going back to the start, it's where do you start with everything, isn't it? And quite often, I suppose, from my sort of perspective, there's a lot of sort of problems that are perceived to be problems, and people are trying to solve problems that maybe don't exist. And I sometimes get annoyed when people say the conveyancing process is broken, because I don't think it is. I just think it needs fine tuning. And when we get a lot of criticism from a lot of other industries about the way we sort of manage the roles that we undertake. But for me, a lot of it's unjustified. And I think what you're doing is hitting the nail on the head with regards to sort of your individual roles and where the problem exists. And I think that is getting from, trying to find that property and actually moving into it. And it's the whole exaggerated process that's potentially the issue, not just the individual facets of conveyancing. I'm not saying that can't be improved, 100% agree. And, you know, I always go back, forget HIPs, forget packs and everything else, just go back to auctions. You know, we have got a process in the UK that's been going on for absolute years called auctions, right? Okay, we quite willy-nilly smash those out every day. You know, get those completed within, you know, half, a third of the time frame that we do other properties. So the rationale and the theory behind everything, as you say, has purely got to be more information up front. You know, we do something here where we sort of try and pre-qualify buyers as well. Nothing to stop a buyer coming to us before they've found their property, because they've still got to lodge ID, go through proof of funds. By the time they've got a gift or given their money as well, we can do all that nonsense. You know, it's sometimes I think it's not trying to reduce the amount we do, but try and put it in different boxes, if you like, do it at earlier stages rather than, you know, when everybody's at their most frustrated and, you know, they've just found their property and they want things to move quickly. And then, of course, we go and put that proverbial brick wall up, don't we, that everyone perceives us as conveyancers to do.
I think the strange thing actually is, you know, I mean, clearly we've had, you know, the AML responsibilities that have been landed on us all in the last 20, 30 years have obviously been huge and ever increasing. But and I'm just going to sound like an old, you know, an untechy old person, which I think essentially I am. But, you know, the process just seems to take inordinately longer now than it did when I first qualified. And you sort of think all of these, you know, so many organisations have piled into the market and really sort of fractured the market in many ways. And do you have, has anyone done research, Beth? And I'm sure, you know, you guys, you know, Beth would have been best placed to do it. How much, you know, information do buyers want? How much do the great British public say they want?
So let me just take it back a second, because you're absolutely right. I am obviously as old as you, because I totally agree. When we first started in conveyancing, it was really straightforward and you could deliver. I mean, my fastest conveyance was 45 minutes, but then, you know, you couldn't even do your AML in that time now, could you? No. But, and as Stuart said, the reason I was able to do that was because all of the information was there. It was somebody's transaction that had fallen through. They were a cash buyer, literally walked in with the notes in the briefcase. And we were able to pay that in and create a banker's draft. And while that was happening, I was telling him about the title, making sure it was suitable for him. He signed the contract. We popped next door to the solicitors next door. We exchanged, we completed, job done. Now, the problem then is we had the dematerializations of deeds at Land Registry in 2003. And so we no longer could keep all of the deeds in our fireproof safe. The lenders no longer kept the deeds in their fireproof safe. In fact, some of them set them on fire, I seem to remember. But
yes, absolutely. And of course,
the comments had to sort it out, didn't we?
Didn't understand the significance of a set of unregistered title deeds. I've had to reconstitute more titles than I care to mention, because the bank just got rid of them.
Yeah, and so if you got additional inquiries saying, you know, what about planning permission for this and what about that, you just look through your old local search and you say, my old local search confirms that the planning was done then and my buildings regulations completion certificate was issued. Here's a copy of it. And you'd have your title indemnity policy for whatever, and you'd have the old deeds, and you would say, oh, well, hang on, yeah, you're right, there was a deed of consent, but actually, you know, we've got the variation here. And you could answer them right off, and you could take all the information out of the old searches. I mean, people say to me all the time, why, you know, the searches run out after 6 months. No, they don't. The data is still there. When was the last time you saw a listing stop? You know, when was the last time you saw a conservation area stop after 6 months? It doesn't happen. It's still useful information for that property transaction. But yes, you're absolutely right. It was a lot easier back in the day when you and I started conveyancing, because you could answer all of the information because you had it right there. What we want to do is recreate that, and that now has to be digital, because, as we say, Land Registry have gone electronic with theirs. They're going digital now as well. I had a meeting with them earlier, and you were on the forum the other day, and you know, we can see that they're moving forward. So if we create that digital twin, the digital deeds packet through the property logbooks, then that means that all of that data is then collated, and then Stuart, you can have your exchange of contracts immediate, as we do with auctions. 26,000 auctions a year go through on hammer fall, and yet, you know, an average conveyancing transaction is 18 weeks and 30% of them will fall through. So, you know, that we can do it. We need the upfront information, but we need to change things. So we need to say, well, actually, the Law Society back in 1991, when they produced the National Conveyancing Protocol, and you might remember this, Lorraine, you don't look that old, but you might.
I do. Yeah, my friend's mum was on the Land Law and Conveyancing Committee, so I was able to get lots of the inside track.
Well, they at the time said that the sellers should be producing the searches. Everybody thought it was a great idea at the Law Society, but no, we're conveyancers. We decided it wasn't a good idea. And yet when you look now, you think, well, hang on a second, as a seller, is it a good idea for me to have a look at the searches and the title and everything that I'm going to be selling and see if there are any issues? Yes, of course, it's in your best interest. And as you're the seller, you 100% know that you're selling that property, whereas as the buyer, you don't know if you can buy that property. And that's why some conveyancers will wait until the mortgage offer is issued. So that delays, and on average, remember, so a lot of us are doing searches immediately, but on average, 6.4 weeks into the transaction, the buyer's conveyancer will order the search. So, and of course, the buyers are the sellers as well. So it's not costing anybody any more money. It's a neutral transfer for the seller or buyer to be ordering the search. If the seller's got it, well, you're moving the overall cost from the first time buyer who's got no dosh anyway to the seller who is going to realise an asset at the end of the chain. So move the seller, getting the searches, get everything up front, getting the seller completing all of the information when they put the property on the market, get them to get their conveyancers to check the title from a generic point of view to say, well, actually you've got a short lease, we can serve notice because you've been there 2 years and start the extension process. Saying you've got an external wall that, you know, you're on a 18-meter high building. Let's see if we can find what's happened to the wall safety check certificate. You know, just these things, getting them in. All of this stuff that has started hitting owners of properties since the financial crisis. If you think of cladding, estate rent charges, onerous lease terms, all of these things we as conveyancers can fix, but we've got to have it and know that there's a problem to be able to get on with it. And the time to find out there is a problem is not when you've got a buyer, it's before you've got a buyer, just like a car getting their MOT. Oh, God, you got me started.
I've got an interesting question for you then, Beth. So from my point of view, being directly in practice, even though I manage to practice, I've got a heavy caseload myself, I could still foresee problems with the upfront information arrangement, insofar as one of my sort of big criticisms of the powers that be, let's put it that way and be neutral, within our industry, was, I think, a lack of education, let's say, to maybe the general public. And one of the reasons I was particularly interested in the Conveyancing Association was the PR slant. And I heavily believed, and still believe to this day, that there's not enough information out there to educate the general public regarding the process. And if we take it a step back and link that into, for example, what we're talking about now, upfront information, I still foresee problems insofar as, will the conveyancer get told by their client, oh, you're delaying me putting the property on the market because you're insisting I do this or I do that. I still think there is a big problem in that we as conveyancers get blamed for a scenario that is organically arisen purely on either a set of coincidences or because the property that they bought. So the lease extension example, you know, are we going to get blamed as conveyancers because they can't market their property in the same way we get blamed that we're holding up exchange? So I'm still wondering, are we just moving the problem from, you know, a few weeks before still, do you think?
Well, so one of the things that we're looking at in the upfront information group is the idea that we have a property pack available logo. And we did ask the consumers, and 52% of those that responded said property pack available was much more believable than legal pack available. But the idea is that if that logo is on the property, then it shows that available is the title, documents referred to in the title, the searches, and information relating to the property. So hopefully the BASB, but it could be the TA6. Now, you can market your property without that, but if you're marketing it without that, you can't satisfy the CPR requirements. So you have to show by law that you don't have all of the information which you know about or should know about, and therefore you can't put property pack available on there. Now, if you put on the portals the ability to filter for property pack available, as a buyer, which properties are you going to be interested in most? Probably those ones with the material facts that you're going to find out if you can park a white van on your drive or extend it or have your letting or whatever. So yes, I totally agree that we don't want to create a position where we're delaying properties going on the market, where we're apportioning blame. But what we can do is get the consumer to understand what this means to them. And I think that's a really good point that you make, Stuart, about the fact that, you know, the consumer doesn't know. And this is why we have very much an education piece going on in the home buying and selling group, because us conveyancers, we make it so technical and so very special, and we can't possibly explain it to you because it's just too complex. So we'll just tell you in a report that we expect you to read through, and we'll send you a copy of the search, and you'll look at it and go, well, I don't understand any of that, and that's it. Whereas when you buy a car, you don't go and have a look through how a combustion engine works, and you don't go and be expected to read the entire manual. All you do is you have an MOT that tells you if it's safe and actually if there are other things that you should be doing. And that's really what we need. We need to be able to distill it down to what the general material facts are about a property. And, you know, you and I know as conveyancers that actually there's probably only 3 or 5 material facts per property. But there are a lot of different ones that they could be. And so actually being able to squirt it down to just those 3 or 5 things and say to the buyer, and this is what it means to you, will help them understand it. But also think of yourself as a parent. How do you tell your child what they need to look out for when they buy a house? There's so many different things. You know, you're going to talk about the fact they've got a cat down the road and you might have barking, keep you awake at night. No, what you need to be able to say to them is, have you asked for whether the property pack is available? Have you checked the material facts to make sure that it's okay for you? That's it. It's equivalent of, have you checked to see if there's an MOT, and have you checked the service history? That's trying to do the same sort of thing. So we need to bring it down to that sort of level. But the only way we can do that is by delivering at that sort of level.
Where does the but I'm not sure I understand in that scenario, Beth, where the lawyer advises and the client instructs kind of emphasis lies, because and to be completely fair and to speak for conveyancers, I think there'd probably be a lot of conveyancers watching this that say, you know, actually we don't agree with you. We do make a big effort in our reports because we're under a duty to do so, to make sure our clients understand what we're telling them. Now I know there's always research out there that makes it clear that clients don't fully understand everything they're told, but I'm sure there's lots of firms that are striving to do that. I mean, are you almost, dare I say, sort of talking the conveyancer out of the deal? Because if you're looking to just reduce everything, for argument's sake, to 5 things, and almost say to the client, kind of, yes, you can buy this, which actually is not the emphasis at all, isn't it? It's these are the issues. Now you instruct me. Do you want to go ahead or don't you? Sort of thing. So
you're absolutely right, and I totally agree. We as conveyancers spend a huge amount of time trying to produce reports that clients can understand, but actually what you tend to find is they don't read it. I mean, how many times have you had clients come back to you later and say, well, the garage isn't included, I've just found out. And you're like, but you signed a plan showing the red edging to say it was right. You know, at the end of the day, for the consumer, they've received too much information. I mean, I could get the file out when I bought this house and it's this bad. Now, luckily, I'm a conveyancer, I understand it, but for the normal human being, it's too much. And so think about, how would you actually explain that to them in a way that they could understand? Now, I'm not suggesting at all that the conveyancer's role should be diminished or misunderstood, but what I would like to do is take the conveyancer's role away from collating information and make it more about what we are brilliant at, which is advising on that information. So let's take the seller. If the conveyancer is helping them collate the information at listing, and hopefully they'll have a logbook so they can pull some of that information from there, the conveyancer is then advising the seller what the general issues are. So I'm not talking about, you know, whether a buyer will agree to this or not. They can only talk about what the generalistic issues are. And then when the buyer is formed, of course, they're going to raise additional inquiries because they will have specific requirements. So it's more about trying to ensure that the conveyancer has the opportunity to provide the advice at the right time. Now, yes, I talk, you know, about material facts and it all sounds so straightforward, but in reality, being able to identify what those facts are, but then the conveyancer at the same time is still going to have to do the normal amount of work in terms of reviewing the information, reporting on it, and doing the due diligence that they think is relevant, not just for the buyer, of course, for the lender as well. But the point is that they'll have everything ready. So think about the last time you got a contract pack and it came through with searches in it. And it was just so wonderful having everything there and being able to report to your client immediately. And why was it wonderful? Well, because it was so early in the process that you knew they would have time to read it and digest it and come back to you with any queries. Whereas the reality is that how many times has somebody said to you, well, thanks very much for sending this LP1 form through. Can you just bloody exchange? And with you sat there, going,
exactly.
Have you seen the service? You know, I don't know about your section 20. No, just exchange. I'm glad you got it in. Let's go. And we want to move away from that. We want people to have enough time. So if we look at the Australian system, in the vendor disclosure states, you have to have all of the information up front, not just up front, but it has to be on the kitchen counter when you go to view the property. The conveyancer then will review it and answer any inquiries that are necessary. The buyer will put in an offer. They will already have had to have been financially qualified because it's a binding offer, but with a 6-day cooling off period. So that's the point at which they do those additional inquiries relating to those intended use and enjoyment and those sort of things. And then from there, everybody knows that they're moving on a particular day. It might still be 10 weeks away because they want to get the kids into school or go on holiday or do whatever, but it's a completely different situation. They're not stressed and everything's organized.
Do you think, Beth, that as the big vision, do you think it's achievable without legislation, without us being mandated to do it?
Frankly, no. I don't. I wish it was, but you know, I speak to so many people who love the idea, think that they'll deliver the idea, but then, you know, they get pushback from the other conveyancers and say, well, CQS won't allow me to accept your form or accept your searches. Now, it has to be said that that's rubbish, so long as the searches are done within the COPSO search code or the CIE search code or our authority searches. You know, even the CLC have come out with a newsletter confirming that you can accept them so long as they're in date, obviously. And, you know, collating the information up front, you know, if the seller is filling in a web page, it doesn't matter whether they've been introduced that web page by the estate agent or by the conveyancer, so long as they fill in the correct information to pre-populate a TA6 or to pre-populate a BASFI, then that's okay. But the difficulty is that we're also used to doing it the way we do it, and we're so hampered by what we're allowed to do by those officials we might have mentioned earlier, it makes it really hard for people, even if they want to take it on, to deliver this. I used to help out at Move With Us and help them develop something very similar. And the only way that they could get the transactions through in their chains any quicker was by ensuring that all of the conveyancers who did the work were all on the Move With Us panel. But when they were able to use a fully comprehensive form, the identity identified using all of the stuff that we've now seen Land Registry say is okay for their safe harbour. And as a result, the transaction times went down by months, not weeks, months.
Yeah.
So we know it can work. We just need to be able to deliver it. And of course, it will only go as the slowest person in the chain. And unless they're all engaged, and we're not just talking conveyancers here, and we've got 3,500 of them registered at Land Registry. We're talking the 14,000 estate agents. So it's going to take mandation by hopefully Mr. Gove. Imagine if he goes, in my first 100 days, I've improved the home moving process. We can do it in 4 weeks now.
I reckon his bigger challenge is cladding, but there we go. Stu, what's your view?
I'm completely sit on the fence because there's part of me that has always advocated upfront information, and I think we'll be silly if we ignore that. I think that's going to come regardless, and I think there will be some kind of mandatory requirement for that in the future, whatever way we look at that. So that's got to be a given, and surely that is an easy win, an easy introduction. But I still worry about, I suppose from my perspective, when I go out and see estate agents, when I talk to clients, despite everybody talking about the conveyancing process being so broken, there's, from my experience, still a lack of want to actually change it. And I think we've half sort of hinted that there are still a lot of law firms out there that would not want to adopt any new processes, new protocols. And of course, we are then bound in by, as you said, Beth, the slowest one in the chain. So it's whether, for me, there's enough appetite across the board, because you could take out half the law firms that are really proactive, that are brilliant, that want to make the change. But if the other half don't, we're stuck anyway. So unless everything is mandatory, I can't see the appetite being strong enough. Obviously, it's there from a certain perspective, but I'm not sure across the board. And I'm not sure even with some estate agents either. You know, we've operate something here, we just called it Fast Move, you know, not reinventing the wheel. Basically, they just complete the protocol forms, you know, when they put their property on the market. Virtually as simple as that. Again, the lack of interest in actually doing it, and if we say you'll save yourself a couple of weeks, at the point of finding that property, that interest is not there. The reason I think the interest is not there is because the knowledge is not there. And what I mean by that is people don't perceive the fact that it's going to take X amount of time because their mate in the pub, you know, we've got all this information at the tip of our fingers now with Google and everything else. Yet the mate in the pub got his through in 4 weeks, 5 weeks. Why is mine taking 10? And you're thinking, well, you're lucky it's gone through in 10, mate. But nevertheless, there's still, I feel, a big hurdle, which is more an information hurdle, and getting this out to the public that I'm not quite sure we are close to solving, maybe.
If Beth, because I'm slightly conscious of time, because I think we could talk to you all day, but if would you, maybe your personal view, if you like, in terms of what might be achievable? I mean, we've identified there's an enormous amount to do, and there's a huge amount of work clearly going on, and rightly so. But if we accept that, you know, unless it's mandated, it might not be happen as quickly as many would like. You know, what would be your top 2 wins if you could introduce things incrementally, Beth, accepting that we're not going to have the big bang? So because, for example, there perhaps isn't a government appetite or legislative time or whatever, the system isn't broken enough to justify, you know, the parliamentary time it would take. So what would be your top 2 wins? If you could pick any 2 of the big list that you've got in your inbox, what would they be?
I think it would be the first thing is we've got the BASB in with the Law Society's equivalency assessment at the moment. So this is where we apply to the Law Society to review the form and confirm whether it is equivalent to the TA6. Now we know it is and it isn't, in that it's got all of the same questions as in the TA6, but it's got extra information as well. Now, if we
it does slightly, sorry to cut across you there, Beth, but in that sense, you know, I've obviously had a look at it and it has got a lot more in.
A lot more.
It does make you wonder how can that not then be classed to be, you know, equivalent or open brackets, possibly better, close brackets, dare I say?
Well, I mean, it's only better for the consumer. And don't forget, you know, the Conveyancing Association very much here to improve the home moving process for the consumer, and in the hope that if we do that, our lives will be better too. Now, yeah, absolutely. It delivers far more information than the conveyancer would currently get in the TA6. So the Law Society looking at, fingers crossed, they'll give us an equivalency.
BASB 1.
Once the BASB is there, then that goes onto their website and says, we'll accept you, you know, you can, under CQS, you can use BASB or TA6. But of course, you and I know you can use any form you like. As long as you do your due diligence, no regulator is going to be upset with you, because the SRA say, well, CQS is voluntary. So you can choose to use that form or you can choose to use that form. But as long as you do the job right, you're all right. So BASB, we need that. And then our technology subgroup is just magical. And what I really want them to do is to deliver that, so that, just as we say, all of those people that are not comfortable mandating, undertaking change voluntarily, will find that their technology will update it for them, so that they don't have to do stuff differently. The processes will have changed order, so the seller provides the information, but their systems already will do that. Most of them have still got the stuff for the programming from HIPS, so we don't have a problem with that. And that way it will be delivered for those people who don't have time really to embrace change. And so it's technology and it's BASB and, fingers crossed, the Law Society equivalency.
Everything else can come along with it. Yeah. Well, Beth, as I say, I think we could talk all day, really. I think we just assume that we've got sort of like a, you know, you've got a standing invitation to come and talk to us, because I think, you know, we're just teetering on the brink of the end of the SDLT holiday, which of course is the most difficult period that any conveyancers have faced probably ever, as Stu and I have talked about at length the last year. So I think it would be really, really interesting to, you know, to get you back maybe in a few months when the market's settled down a bit, when you've had the opportunity to have more, you know, face-to-face meetings rather than everything on Zoom. So, you know, would you be prepared to do that?
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, anybody watching, if you think I've got a brilliant idea, please let me know, because the Home Buying and Selling Group are always open to looking at ideas and seeing where they can fit in and what they can do to help deliver it.
Excellent. Thank you. Well, thanks ever so much for joining us, Beth. It's been just really, really, really interesting half hour. And just as I say, so much to talk about, really. So thanks ever so much.
Thank you.
Take care.
Take care, guys.